and welcome to the second session in our All About series, and this is all about study skills. So we're very lucky today to have a few people with us. We've got Leanne and Stavrula from our library team. We've got Gerard from CDAS, which is the Centre for Development of Academic Studies, and we've got two of our wonderful student ambassadors, Ellen and Manuela, who will be answering some of your questions as well. And with that, that's really all I've got to say. My name is Sophie. I am a Schools and Colleges Liaisons Officer here at Royal Holloway. And I'm going to pass over to the library team to get started.
Hello, hi, welcome there everyone. I am Leanne Workman. I am one of the librarians here at Royal Holloway. And Stavrula, Dr. Stavrula Christie is one of our librarians as well. And today we're going to start off the study skills session. I think one of the great things about being a librarian is that people underestimate us and they think we're all about looking after books and shushing people. In fact, Stavrula and I don't do very much with actually the physical books in the library, and we certainly haven't shushed anyone today. In fact, you'll probably find that we are two of the loudest librarians you'll ever meet. One of our jobs is to actually go out and shout about what library resources we have to teach students what resources we have, how best to find it, how best to manage those information resources. And some of the things we're going to talk today about study skills, particularly relating to exams and revision, are things that we've learned by talking and working very closely with our students here at Royal Holloway. So we hope these little nuggets that we've pulled together for you are going to be really helpful. So let's move on to what we're going to cover today, and this is both what Stavrula and I will cover, and then also we'll move on and chasse into talking to Gerard, and Gerard from CDAS, as Sophie said, the Centre for Development of Academic Skills, will talk a bit more about how to develop active learning skills and exams and that side of things. So we're going to start off with who we are and what we help our students with at Royal Holloway. We're going to really touch on how to tackle practically studying and revising, and how to develop those skills, and hopefully get a bit of a flavour as well about what studying at Royal Holloway and what help and support we have at Royal Holloway as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat. We want this to be as helpful as possible. Stavrula, when I'm talking, is going to be on chat, and Gerard's there and Sophie's there, and we have our two wonderful student ambassadors as well. So please do use the chat to kind of engage with us, let us know what you're thinking and your questions. We want this, as I say, to be a really helpful session for you. So let's just kickstart with why there are two librarians here talking to you about study skills. So the library helps students at Royal Holloway the whole year round, everything from assignments to exams. We help students find information, so this could be for assignments like essays, but also actually for revision, and how to access those things that perhaps they haven't used the whole year round, to help them to revise. As you will be already aware, there is just so much information out there. And we're not, as I say, just talking about physical books in a library building, although we do have, I think, over 500,000 physical books in the library. That's actually a very small section of our resources that we have. We have a wealth of resources online, and actually using that plus all the information that you have on the internet can be quite daunting to try and sift through and find. So one of our tasks is to help students kind of sift through it all, evaluate the information that they're finding, and use it effectively in both their assignments and their exams. And then particularly what's probably more relevant to assignments than exams is that we help with citation and referencing. So Harvard referencing style is one of the popular referencing styles that you might already be familiar with, but there are lots of different styles out there, and in the library we're able to help students with all those different styles from Harvard to some of the more complicated and tricky ones, for example like Scholar. So if you're a law student, you might be familiar with that. And all of the things that we do around citing and referencing is to help avoid plagiarism, which is obviously where one is known for taking a piece of work from someone else and not giving due credit where it's due for that person's ideas or work. So you're passing it off as your own, and that's where citing and referencing comes in to kind of help flag, this is where I've taken this piece of information from. And then in terms of the library and how we kind of reach out to students. We do a whole variety of different things. So obviously we've got a wonderful, fabulous building, which Stavrula will show you some pictures of towards the end of our bit today. But we go into lectures. So we are teaching librarians. We go out, we actually leave the library building and we conduct lectures, we pop up in seminars, we do one-to-one support for assignments and exams. We have a great online a range of resources through Library Moodle, which is our virtual learning environment, where we have lots of videos, there's activities to test your knowledge, all of these sort of type of things. And then you can contact your information consultant, which is actually what we're called. Basically, it's a very posh name for librarians. So that's kind of what we do at Royal Holloway and how we support our students. And this is how we've kind of gathered together all this knowledge and little nuggets of information we're going to share with you now. So Stavrula and I put our heads together and we come up with 7 top tips on managing revision. And we hope that these will be useful to you. So my first top tip is to think of it like a job. So we tell this with a lot of students, especially when they start at university, because one of the things you'll find now that you've coming away from your school timetable is that you've got a lot of what you consider free time. But actually you need to think of it like your revision timetable, like a job. So treat it like a 9 to 5. And kind of actually draw up yourself a day schedule of what you're going to do. So we'll probably be talking between about 7 hours a day, like it would be a full-time job, so 35 hours a week. And you'd want to kind of really think about kind of what you want to cover in that sort of time. So you are now independent studiers. This is a real key skill for when you go on to any jobs, but also if you go on to university, you do have time where you're scheduled in lectures and seminars, but actually there'll be a lot of time where you are free to go away, read, and actually to independently study, and that's a key part of university life. And so you're in control of your time, so this is a really good practice for that. But also when you're in a job, you get given a task, it's your job to kind of break it down and work out how you are going to kind of reach that task at the end, the deadline at the end. So we often recommend like a study timetable to ensure that you cover all the topics that you're doing, think of all the tasks that you've got to do, and make sure that your hours of the day are kind of scheduled in there so you know what you're going to be doing each day. With that in mind, we always suggest as our top tip number 2 is to break the work down. Often when you think about the exam, so if you're doing any A-levels, BTECs, etc., you can just be like, right, I need to revise for my history A-level. That is a huge kind of topic, and it can seem very, very daunting. So we suggest that you chunk it, that you break the work down into different topics. So perhaps one of the areas you'll be looking at is, I don't know, Italian unification. Still, that's quite a large topic. You might want to break it down into the different themes. And actually what I find quite useful is using a spider diagram to kind of think about all the different themes, the different areas that you need to explore, especially if your teachers have given you any hints perhaps of what the exams might cover. You might want to make sure you're kind of jotting down all of these sort of areas that might be covered. And that can then provide the basis of your timetable. So you can kind of start planning your 9 to 5 full-time job of studying and revising. And the whole idea behind this is that you are making it more manageable, you're making it seem less daunting, and it's there to be helpful to you and to kind of help you meet those deadlines. And one of the things we want to do is make sure that you've covered all the topics by the time it gets to your exam, and so you're not kind of left with a whole handful of topics that you haven't yet covered. There are some really great things to use. So one of the apps that I like to use is Trello, which is free to use. You can get it on your web, on a web browser, you can get it on your tablet and any of your devices, and it actually helps you manage your tasks. But there's lots of apps and tools out there as well. So if you're a bit techie and you like to have things away from paper, you've got some tools out there that can help you do that.
Leanne just mentioned about chunking. So this video illustrates very nicely the chunking business, and hopefully the video will play, and I will put in the chat the link of the video in YouTube and also the source we got the video. Let's start the video, please, Leanne.
Now it can be stored for years. Hard number to remember. 081127882 is a hard number to remember. If you chunk the number into 081127882, it's easier. Cutting large bits of information into smaller pieces helps us to understand. If we put small pieces back together, we can see the big picture, and that helps us to remember. The process is called chunking. This is how it works. Our short-term memory is fast but tiny. According to learning expert Dr. Oakley, it can hold only 4 chunks of information at once. So when new inputs arrive, it has 2 ways to pick them up. First, it can overwrite and forget what it has to make space for new information. Or it can use mental effort to move a chunk from the working memory into the long-term memory, where it can be stored and remembered later. This is why it's almost impossible to recall 9 digits like 0811278882. There is simply not enough space. Once chunked, there is. There are several ways to chunk. You can break a larger piece into smaller bits, identify patterns, or group pieces to see the larger picture. Once a chunk is created, you can use deliberate practice to move it into your long-term memory where it connects with existing experiences. Now it can be stored for years and, if regularly used, accessed without much mental effort. To make this transfer more effective, it helps to add context, which acts like memory superglue. Great instructors always try to give you the big picture before going into detail. If you study by yourself, you can skim through your textbook first by reading chapter headlines. Learning facts without understanding the big picture is pretty useless, as we will forget what we have learned very fast. Professional piano teachers first show their students the entire song so they understand the mood. Then they ask their students to practice one measure at a time. Once the part has been learned and the neural connections in the brain have been built, then students go on to the next measure. After all chunks can be played separately, they are combined until the entire piece is connected. Now the student can play the piece with less mental effort. Chunking also helps to understand complex topics, say trade between China and India. First, study China, the people, the culture, and the economy. Then summarize and put what you learned in your own simple language. Repeat the process for India. Then study trade itself, the mechanics, benefits, and problems. Again, simplify to form an underlying idea. At the end, you might just have summarized several books onto one napkin. Try chunking next time you feel the limits of your working memory. Just like how clever restaurants chunk their menus into starters, mains, and desserts with 3 to 4 options each. With chunking, it's easy to compare our options and make a decision.
Thank you. Our next top tip is start each week and day planning your tasks. Actually, day-to-day lists are often best written before you break of the day or the evening. This means you can get straight to work the next day and avoid spending half the morning on your to-do list. Yes, it can happen, just wasting half of our mornings. Knowing what you are studying and when is important. You don't want your exam to be tomorrow morning and you realize that you haven't covered half the topic. So work your way back from the exam date and ensure you have enough time to cover all your topics. Next slide, please. Don't plan all your time. There will be always unexpected things to do or unplanned interruptions. Also, some topic might take longer to revise. If you plan, let's say 75 or 80% of your available time, it will leave time to revise, study those topics that you don't anticipate or take longer than you expect to revise, and you will still get all your to-do list done, which is very important. Next slide, please. There is always help available. So revision or studying alone can be very challenging. Working with friends and family to revise is a fun way to study and it feels less lonely. At university, we have lots of support for students. There is a friend, there are us friendly librarians, as we hope we have shown you, always happy to show you the ropes of how to use an academic library, find sources of information, reference, etc., and CIDAS, whom you will hear from in just a moment. There is also academic writing and math support at our university. There is a well-being team, which is very important all year round and especially during the exams. You have an academic personal tutor, and in some departments at Royal Holloway, there is also a peer mentoring scheme where older students support those new at Royal Holloway. Get yourself a support ring. It works wonders for our students here at Royal Holloway. Next slide, please. Study environment. Study environment is really important and it depends on what you like. For me, I usually study in a silent area, but you might prefer a low-level background noise to help you study. You need to choose the environment that suits you for your study. You can see here in the images we have prepared for you that we have a variety of study spaces at Royal Holloway, social study areas, silent group study areas for all tastes. I also like to have a clear desk with me and with only what I need to study in front of me. At Royal Holloway, as I mentioned, we have a variety of spaces. For those who are working in groups, the social study space is the place to go. For those who just want to knuckle down, head to the silent study spaces. Find your study groove. Choose one or more study spaces that suits you, or you may choose more than one or two, depending on the day and the mood you are in the day. Next slide, please. Distractions are the best friends of procrastination. There is lots of ways to do this. Low tech. Just put all your phones, your tablet in a box, drawer or bag and schedule breaks when you can check it. Set a time for how long you can check it. There are lots of apps, just to mention a few, App Detox, Siempo, Forest, Hold, which limit the time to spend on your popular apps and remind you to get back to work. Minimize also notifications, especially for the most distracting apps. Next slide, please. And now we have an activity. We would like to know what you think, what are your own top tips for revision, and to share with us and your colleagues. Please reply in the chat. Just give us your ideas. Thank you.
Yes, just to come in there, Stavroula. Yeah, I think that was really good stuff there. Really insightful what the library was saying about some really important stuff related to time management, chunking, getting the big picture, and of course, getting in a study environment that's going to help you with revision. But it's always good to kind of go to students because sometimes you have the best ideas. So I think it would be great if you could pop down a few ideas in the chat and we can have a little discussion about them. So don't be shy, just put anything that comes to mind, something maybe a technique or a strategy that you've used before. It'd be really great to hear from you. So if you could put something in, that would be great.
We've also had a suggestion, that's a message that's come through to the organisers saying that creating large revision posters on topics broken down in bite-sized chunks has really helped them, as well as recording themselves and then listening to it back has been really, really helpful, and kind of creating a PowerPoint and setting on continuous loop to recap notes.
And then we've got, sorry, don't have a name here, but colours. Yes, I love a bit of colour coding.
Oh, that's me.
That's you, is it? Oh yeah, Leanne. Sorry.
I was responding to Manuela's comment that she uses colours to check.
That's wonderful. You like a bit of chunking and colour coding. And we've got chat says, clearing my desk and having a quiet and clean space to work always helps me. Okay. And then I think this may be Sophie, keep organized early on. Make sure your lecture notes are legible. Yeah, because there's nothing worse than going back to your notes and they're indecipherable. What was that I was studying then? You've just got no kind of clear record of your thoughts or the information at the time. And then we've got, this is Charlotte writes, thank you, Charlotte. I write my notes in the structure of a question I could expect in an exam. Oh, great! That's really that's really quite clever. So you're kind of, it's not just taking in the information, but you're shaping the information to a particular question. And I think that's a really hot tip. That's a really good idea. And then we've got another one. I have a revision playlist, many Lord of the Rings soundtracks I could sing along. Yeah, we'll come to that because there's a little bit of debate about whether that's a good thing or not. A lot of these strategies and techniques, it comes down to individuals and individual preferences. And Ellen writes, I find working on paper, especially revision cards, are good to summarize smaller topics. Ellen, are you there? Do you want to sort of come in on that a little bit? Just expand on that? You're there?
Sure. Yeah, I just have like 1,000 different flashcards. I study science, so I always kind of had different equations or yeah, things I would kind of have to remember, which might be a lot smaller than having to write an essay like some people have to do. So I found them very useful. I also have a brother who's dyslexic, so when it came to him revising for his exams, I would then write them for him because, as someone said earlier, it's always good to actually be able to read the handwriting, which my brother definitely struggles with. And yeah, so I do like doing revision cards, but I also think mind maps are another good way to visualize and kind of like show the links between different thought processes.
Excellent. And tell me, Ellen, you say working on paper, so you actually like working, you know, with physical paper rather than, because there are, as you know, online apps like Quizlet, which are basically flashcards. So you prefer actually doing it manually, physically, creating the flashcards. Is that right?
Yeah, so I actually didn't start using my laptop to work until I think like second or third year of uni. I'm now in fourth year. Because I find that my mind takes it in better when I've actually written it down. It's almost like the process of your brain having to write it rather than type it. Then when I was in the exam hall, I would start writing and I might think, oh, I don't really know what that is. And then all of a sudden, before you know, your hand's kind of writing it for you because you have the muscle memory as well as the actual knowledge of the topic. So yeah, I definitely think actually physically writing something for me is definitely more productive.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Ellen. And our other student ambassador Manuela writes about teaching others is really helpful. Manuela, if you don't mind, can I come on to that later? Because that's something I want to bring up. And if I could bring you in at that point, that would be really helpful. So, okay, so I'm Jared Clough, and I'm a senior teaching fellow at CDAS, which stands for the Centre for the Development of Academic Skills, as Leanne and Stavroula have mentioned. I'll tell you a little bit more about that towards the end. I've just got a little bit of advice which I'd like to share with you on two things, really. One is a bit more on revision strategies, so touching on some of those excellent ideas that you put forward, but also for some of you, shortly in the next year or two, you will be doing in-person exams, and I've got just a few simple ideas about strategies for doing a paper in an exam hall under controlled timed conditions. Okay, so smart revision. What's smart revision? Smart revision is kind of revising, preparing for exams in an efficient and effective way. And a lot of research has actually been done on this. And some of the techniques that have been kind of instilled in us over the years and which we think are great, the research shows maybe they are not the most efficient. So I'm going to go through a few of those, and then kind of move forward and talk about active retrieval as being the kind of approach that certainly the neuroscientists say is kind of the most effective way. So here are some things that perhaps think twice about, okay? So one thing, and maybe this is rather obvious actually, is cramming information in. So just stuffing information into your brain, especially if you're having to do it really quickly and under stress. The chances that you're going to retain that knowledge are pretty slim if you're doing it in a hurried way and just kind of trying to put a lot of information into yourself. So that's not such a great idea. The other thing, and this is something I do, is kind of read the key texts and get lots of highlighters in different colors and spend quite a bit of time highlighting. Now, I think that's a really, really useful first step, because what you're doing there is identifying the stuff that you need to learn and maybe doing a bit of chunking at the same time. But the process of just highlighting isn't really active learning in itself. So if you spend an afternoon just doing a lot of highlighting and feel kind of good about it at the end, it doesn't necessarily mean you've engaged in a deep, active way with the knowledge. So just bear that in mind. Now, listening to music. Okay, so you might think that listening to music, listening to your favorite tracks kind of gets you into the zone. But again, some recent research shows that actually the best way to revise is in absolute silence. So you can maximize your focus and really concentrate without any distraction. And in talking of distraction, this has already been mentioned. There's so many digital distractions now. And even having a phone on your desk is a kind of distraction best avoided. So keep your desk free of all those potential distractions, the Instagram stuff coming through to you, social media of any kind. So let's move forward now, thinking in a kind of more positive way about what does work. I think the thinking at the moment, as I said, based on kind of neuroscience, is that retrieval practice is kind of the way forward. So this is less about putting knowledge into yourself and more about how you retrieve it, get it out, and actually activate your knowledge. And I'm going to give you some examples of what this means in practice. So one example, and again, this may seem fairly obvious to you, is doing past exam papers, and maybe doing past exam papers to time under time conditions. And this is a great way to work with the knowledge you have, but shaping that knowledge to particular tasks and questions. So that kind of gets you really in touch with the knowledge and honing that knowledge to a particular question. The other thing is it's a kind of test-teach principle, because by doing these papers, you soon rapidly learn about what you know and what you don't know. And that what you don't know then becomes a focus for doing some kind of urgent revision information. Finding what you getting the books, the information that where your gaps are and filling those gaps. What else have we got? We've got these are two strategies and this is where I'm going to go to Manuela, where we can work with our peer group, its classmates, teaching, explaining something from the curriculum, or actually presenting to your peer group. And I'm going to actually stop there and ask Manuela, because you mentioned this yourself. Would you like to kind of come in there and say something about your own experience of that, Manuela, if you're there?
Yeah, of course. Let me know if you can't hear me. But
I can hear you fine, yeah.
perfectly, brilliant. Yeah, so I revised always independently when I was doing my GCSEs and my A levels, and I found that when it came to exam season, I was always very anxious because I was like, okay, I've just sat here all this time learning this information, but how do I know that when I go into the exam, I'm not just going to forget it? So my mum and I would kind of set ourselves challenges that I would spend the day revising on a certain topic, or like I would choose certain things and set myself a checklist, which has also been previously mentioned. And then at the end of the day, my mum, if it was a short topic, we would go over it together, and I would she would ask me a question and I would explain it, and that kind of solidified my understanding for me. And it also made me aware that I didn't need to know everything word for word, but rather think about how I can use my knowledge to explain myself. And yeah, kind of just went around doing that.
God, so that was with your mum. So not just classmates, but your guardians or parents can be useful if persuaded to help.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And did you find that the actual process of explaining something made you actually kind of critically engage and think quite deeply about the knowledge that you were having to explain to your mum?
Definitely. I think like any sort of public exam can be really daunting, and I find that there's so much pressure for you to have to remember quite a big amount of content, especially whilst you're still at school. And I remember feeling like I had to know everything word for word, and I just remember creating this insane amount of pressure on myself that just was not practical. So doing that with my mum just kind of showed that I didn't need to say those things. I could say exactly the same thing in a different way and still reach the same marks and get the same a credit for it.
Okay, that's great. I think one advantage if you can find a classmate or classmates who are doing the same syllabus or in the same subject is that if you do present to them on a topic, you're going to get some really helpful feedback from them. So it might be something that they've noticed that doesn't look quite right in your explanation. So it might be pointing out something that you need to work on, or actually filling in gaps, or saying, look, you've forgotten this. So actually that becomes quite a useful, rich, collective exercise in revision, both for you and the other people there in the kind of revision group, essentially. Making a storyboard, this is just a suggestion. It works for some people because what you're doing there, particularly if you're doing an essay-based subject, is that you're putting knowledge together into a kind of visual storyline, and that means that you're organizing the knowledge into something coherent. And of course, in an exam, that's what you have to do. You have to shape knowledge into a kind of narrative, into a story, into an argument. So storyboarding, particularly if you're a visual learner, is something to think about. And flashcards. Flashcards have been mentioned. Physical flashcards, or Quizlet. And then my daughter used Quizlet in her A-level year. Really, again, it's kind of test and teach. It activates your knowledge, and I think it's particularly useful for learning factual knowledge. So things like history, languages, sciences. It's a great way to get you in touch with the knowledge and actually retain that knowledge if you do it on a regular basis. So those are some ideas. Mind mapping, again, that's really useful because there you're seeing the connections between different bits of information, different bits of knowledge, and you're seeing there the bigger picture, which is really important, and which Leanne mentioned earlier on. Okay, I'm just aware of the time. We're nearing the end, so I'm just going to mention very briefly before we go to a kind of Q&A at the end. In-person exams. These are what I'm showing here are resources that we've devised for our students, and of course, in-person exams are actually something quite novel for a lot of our students because of the pandemic. And so we put together this resource for those students who are a little bit anxious about this new experience of going into an exam hall and sitting down and doing 2 or 3 hours and writing to time. So this resource looks at, for example, the kind of rules and regulations about in-person exams, things that you can do before to kind of relax and get focus, what it's like on the day, things that you need to do on the day, and in terms of putting your alarm clock on and having a checklist of things that you need to have ready for the exam venue, what you can take into the exam venue, what you can't, that sort of thing. But this is the bit I just wanted to touch on, and that is when you sit down, when the invigilator, that's the person who supervises the exam, says, okay, start the paper, and you turn over the paper. These are some things to bear in mind, or for me to maybe just remind you of or reinforce. So first thing to do is please make sure that you survey the whole paper so that you get a sense of the lie of the land, all the questions, how marks are allocated in the paper, and maybe allocate yourself a certain amount of time for each question, particularly if it's an essay-based exam. And don't do what my son did. He's doing his mock A levels, and he came back and he said, I said, how did it go? And he said, yeah, the first question I did really well. I think that's a cracker. And then the second one not too bad, but I really, I only got halfway through the third question. And then he said, yeah, it was 50 marks for the last question and 25 for the first two. So, that's kind of poor exam technique. You should have actually thought very carefully about making sure he had enough time for the question that carried the most marks. So you need to be quite savvy, quite strategic, when you read through the paper. So that's just one tip. The other tip, of course, is particularly for essay questions, you need to read the question really carefully. Don't just, it's not, the essay questions aren't normally like a knowledge dump. Everything I know about this subject, let me get it down onto the paper. Look at the question and shape a response with relevant knowledge from what you've got in your head. So not just spouting everything you know and regurgitating it onto the paper. It is, I think, really helpful and really important as well, when you look at your exam questions, to kind of just briefly sketch out, map out a plan for your answer. And I mentioned this as something to do at the beginning, maybe for all your questions, because what happens is often, as you get towards the end of the exam period, you're kind of racing against the clock. And it's quite difficult then when you've only got, whatever it is, half an hour, 20 minutes for that final question to kind of think on your feet. If you've got that essay plan by your side, then that's a fantastic kind of aid to you when you are having to write something down really fast, because you've got the plan, just follow that. Okay, you've done the thinking at the beginning of the exam. And make sure you have time to review what you've written. Just think about things if it's an in-person exam and you're using a pen, legibility, just quickly skim through, is everything you've written clear? Because the marker has to understand what you've written. So that's something to do, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the end of the exam. Factor that into your time management. Now, finally, just dealing with nerves. Now, this is something that comes up, and I think it's kind of top of mind for a lot of students who are doing in-person exams. A bit of anxiety and a bit of stress can be useful because it produces a useful amount of adrenaline. But what happens when in the kind of middle of the exam, you kind of begin to panic? Maybe you've answered a question poorly and suddenly you start to get into panic mode. You start sweating and you can't think straight. 3 things that you could do, and I'm going to march through these. First of all, do something physical. Just calm down, put your pen down, relax, take some deep breaths, maybe move your head slowly from side to side. Take a sip of water. Certainly at Royal Holloway, we allowed water in the exam hall, and you'll immediately physically feel a bit better. And then it's what's going on inside your head. Deal with those negative thoughts, okay, which can be quite overwhelming. So fight back against them. Your exam answers don't have to be perfect, okay? You just need to do your best with what you know. And sometimes you can use a little positive mantra. Just repeat to yourself, I can do this. I can do this. Or I'm a very capable person. I'm going to do well in this exam. And that can just buoy you up. And then go back to the paper and kind of give it a fresh look at what's left to do, and then think what you're going to focus on. And then just forget about everybody else in the room and just get back to business. Okay, so that was a bit of a march through what to do with an exam paper in kind of in-person exam conditions. So just a little bit about this is that, where are we? Yeah, so these resources are from our own virtual learning environment at Royal Holloway. So you can see we've got some other resources here. We've got a podcast that we did recently with the Student Union and some more videos about exams. And this all sits on this page here. And so what we have at Royal Holloway is we have 6 different schools with different subjects. And I happen to be the learning developer for the School of Performing and Digital Arts. So I support all students in that school. And if students want to come and see me for some advice about, for example, their coursework essays, or they just want to drop in and they've got some questions about exams, they can book a one-to-one writing tutorial with me. And that can be quite helpful because people can bring along draft work in progress before submission. I look at it, give them some advice, they can make improvements, and that can kind of up their grades. And we also offer courses and workshops like the library. We've got some self-study resources, and all of that sits on this page. But we do a lot of work as well in departments, on course in the curriculum as part and parcel of what you study at Royal Holloway on a particular module or course. That's enough from me. I'm aware that I've taken up quite a bit of time. So back to you, Sophie. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you, Leanne and Savrula as well. So we've got about 5 more minutes left, and now it's just a chance if anyone's got any questions to type them in the chat and find out. It could be for Jared, could be for Leanne and Savrula, or our student ambassadors. One thing I will also draw your attention to is actually a message that Ellen put in the chat. saying that there are practice papers online. For example, for those doing physics and maths, there's a website called Physics and Maths Tutor, but it has a whole bunch of other subjects as well, and that's a really good way of practicing past papers.
Yeah, can I just quickly add? So I just basically I was given it as an A-level student by one of my teachers. So I just thought I'd quickly have a look on the website again, see definitely what's on there. They do have a load of revision notes as well as past papers. So for those of you who maybe don't want to sit there writing loads of notes and actually find it useful to read someone else's, but from a different perspective, not just from the textbook. I'm assuming most of you are probably A-level students, but they do also have GCSEs. And yeah, they have a whole range of subjects, so English, psychology, all the different sciences, maths, and I think geography as well.
Well, oh, one question. When I'm doing past papers at home, I struggle to stick to the time because I feel as though there are no consequences if I don't. Do you have any tips to help someone revising stick to things like this?
If I'm being perfectly honest, I actually never used to do it with the timer, just for the same reason as you. I just used to think, oh, well, I'll kind of get through it when I get through it. So, when it got to the beginning of the holidays, I'd spend probably like half a day making a revision timetable of what I was going to do for like the whole however many weeks I was off for. And so I'd start with the different topics, and then once I'd planned out all the topics that I needed to study, then I would add in time to do past papers, to test like how well I'd actually done at revising, what I obviously still didn't know, what I kind of half knew but just wasn't wording it correctly, and then the bits that I was definitely confident with. I do think it is good to put a timer on, but sometimes if I would put a timer on, then I put it on my phone, and then my phone would be next to me. So I actually just found it's like more of a distraction than just not having a timer and like leaving my phone downstairs. I think for you guys, if you haven't done in-person exams, for like I did all my GCSEs and my A-levels and my first year exams all in person, so I've had quite a lot of practice with having to do them that way. So you get used to having to time them. And I also, I'm not sure if all schools do it, but at the end of every year, like from even like year 5, I would have to do exams at the end of every year. So I knew what it was like to be in that situation where I was being timed. I don't think it's like the end of the world if you don't stick to the time. Like lots of people don't manage to get to the end of the paper even in their real exams. Not that I'm saying that's not like the best thing to do, but I'm just saying I don't think you should beat yourself up if you like miss like 1 or 2 questions. I don't know if anyone else has any ideas as to like how to make sure you stick to the time. I do know that for some papers, like for my maths paper, I knew I was basically doing like a mark a minute. So if I was spending longer than 1 minute on one question, it was better just to move on to the next question than it was to sit there and keep wondering what I needed to do to answer the question. So if you can work out kind of roughly how many marks you have per minute, I think that is a good way to do it.
I think Jared has some thoughts as well.
I have some thoughts, yes, just by listening to students actually. But if you're not good at writing to time, because it is an odd thing to do, isn't it? I mean, one thing you can do is kind of get the past papers, look at some questions, and actually just draft like a plan answer without actually having to write the whole essay. Or you can invent consequences for yourself because you say there are no consequences. Well, you can make consequences for yourself. So maybe more carrot than stick. So promise yourself, an ice cream or a trip to Starbucks or something at the end if you do stick to time. So that's something that you can bear in mind because it is quite difficult to simulate that kind of pressurized environment because it is quite a unique thing where everybody look around, you're in a big room with lots of other people and there's a clock ticking away. It's quite difficult to kind of imagine yourself into that situation. But yeah, I think just planning some answers to past papers is going to be really useful. If you want to try and simulate the occasion and maybe just invent some consequences for yourself.
I will add actually something to this. I think this is where the tip about working with friends can really help as well. So when I was revising, I used to give my phone to a friend. So I'd set the timer, we'd sit opposite ends of the room, facing opposite directions, and have each other's phones, so that if the timer went off, we had the phone with us, but we didn't personally. And it means someone else holds you accountable as well. So that could be something you might want to try. So it's been lovely to talk to you all. I hope you all got a lot out of it. I know even I did. I'm going to be using some of these tips going forward. So thank you very much to Savrula, Leanne, Gerard, Ellen, and Manuela. And I hope everyone has a lovely rest of their evening.